Hi, I'm Alex Kelly.
And I'm Jacob Rapp.
And I'm Logan Sullivan.
The First Crusade. Pope Urban II in Rome in 1095 received an ambassador from Byzantine Emperor Alexius in Constantinople seeking urgent help against the Turkish threat. The Pope acted promptly and called a crusade with the goals of securing access to the holy sites. Historian Paul Everett Pearson says he also hoped that if the Crusaders aided the Eastern Church by defeating the Turks, the Church would be reunited under his leadership. Inspired by Pope Urban II, preaching Peter the Hermit led as many as 20,000 people, mostly peasants, to the Holy Land shortly after Easter in 1096. When they arrived in Germany in spring 1096, units of Crusaders commenced the Rhineland massacres in the cities of Speyer, Worms, Mainz, and Cologne. Despite the efforts by Catholic bishops to protect the Jews, major leaders included Amico and Peter the Hermit. The range of anti-Jewish activity was broad, extending from limited spontaneous violence to full-scale military attacks on the Jewish communities of Mainz and Cologne. This was the first major outbreak of anti-Jewish violence in Europe and was cited by 19th century Zionists as showing the need for a Jewish state. When the group finally reached the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Alexius urged them to wait for the Western nobles, but they insisted upon proceeding and fell to a Turkish ambush outside Nicaea, from which only about 3,000 people escaped. The official Crusader armies departed from France and Italy in August and September of 1096. The bulk of the army divided into four parts which traveled separately to Constantinople, with non-combatants included. The Western forces may have contained as many as 100,000 people. The armies journeyed eastward by land toward Constantinople, where they received a wary welcome from the Byzantine emperor. The main army, mostly comprising French and Norman knights under baronial leadership, pledged to restore lost territories to the empire and marched south through Anatolia. The leaders of the First Crusade included Godfrey of Bouillon, Robert Curthose, Hugh of Vermandois, Baldwin of Bouillon, Tancred de Hauteville, Raymond of Toulouse, Bohemond of Taranto, Robert III, Count of Flanders, and Stephen, Count of Blois, the King of France, and Henry IV, Holy Roman Emperor, were in conflict with the Pope and did not participate. The Crusader armies initially fought the Turks at the length. The siege of Antioch, which began in October 1097 and lasted until June 1098, when they entered Antioch, the Crusaders massacred the Muslim inhabitants and pillaged the city. However, a large Muslim army led by Carboga immediately besieged the victorious Crusaders, who were now inside Antioch, Bohemond of Taranto successfully rallied the Crusader army and defeated Carboga on the 26th of June. Bohemond and his men retained control of the city. Despite his pledge to Alexius, most of the remaining Crusader army marched south, moving from town to town along the coast, finally reaching Jerusalem on the 7th of June 1099 with only a fraction of their original forces. Jews and Muslims fought together to defend Jerusalem against the invading Franks, but the Crusaders entered the city on 15 July of 1099. They proceeded to massacre the remaining Jewish and Muslim civilians and also pillaged or destroyed mosques or the city itself. In his Historia Francorum Col Caperunt Jerusalem, Raymond de Aguileras exalted actions which would be considered atrocities from a modern viewpoint. As a result of the First Crusade, 4 primary Crusader states were created: Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, and Jerusalem. On a popular level, the First Crusade unleashed a wave of impassioned, pious Catholic fury which was expressed in the massacres of Jews that accompanied the Crusades and the violent treatment of the schismatic Orthodox Christians of the East. Following the First Crusade was a second, less successful crusade, known as the Crusade of 1101, in which Turks led by Key Arsian defeated the Crusaders in 3 separate battles.
Okay, feudalism is the dominant or social system in medieval Europe. It's pretty much the exchange of land in Europe. And the Crusades could not fail to affect, in many ways, the life of the Western Europe. For instance, they helped undermine feudalism. Thousands of barons and knights mortgaged or sold their lands in order to raise money for a crusading expedition. Thousands more perished in Syria and their estates through the failure of hires reverted to the crown. Now, manneralism was an essential element to the feudal society. It was the organizing principle of rural economy that originated in the villa system of the late Roman Empire. It was widely practiced in medieval, Western, and parts of Central Europe, and was slowly replaced by the advent of a money-based market economy and new forms of agrarian contract. Now, manneralism and feudalism are related because, well, they both have to do with distributing land, and manneralism was very essential to a feudal society. Okay. The Crusades were military campaigns sanctioned by the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. The reason for the Crusades was to regain control of Jerusalem, which is ruled or under Muslim control. The effects of the Crusades were mainly political and economical, but also had an effect on the social development of Europe. As to the political effects of the Crusades, they helped break down the power of the feudal aristocracy and to give prominence to the king and the people. Many of the nobles never returned, so their estates went to the king. At the same time, the cities also gained many political advantages at the expense of the crusading barons and nobles. Ready money in the 12th and 13th centuries was largely in the hands of the burgher class, and in return to the contributions and loans they made to, I guess you could say, their overlords or their suzerains, they received charters conferring special and valuable privileges. And the other political effects of the Crusades was that in checking the advance of the Turks, the fall of Constantinople was postponed for 3 centuries or more. This gave early Christian civilizations of Germany time to acquire sufficient strength to roll back the returning tide of the Mohammedan invasion when it broke upon Europe in the 15th century. One of the most significant results of the Crusades was the reduction of economic power in the church and the increased power of lower and middle classes. Peasants benefited from a higher demand on their products and from the availability of real estate. The newly created middle class profited from collecting interest on loans, buying and selling property for the elite, and from providing transportation. The church, which was obligated to provide interest-free loans due to policies on usury, and which had to liquidate assets and share their wealth with other crusaders, suffered a reduction in power, and that allowed others in Europe to flourish.